AITA for refusing to pay for my boyfriend's mom's birthday dinner after she called me his temporary girlfriend. He said I should apologize for humiliating him and his mom. My name is Anna. I'm 27 years old, I live in Chicago, I work full-time in marketing for a tech startup, and for the past year and a half, I've been dating a guy named Eric. He's 30, works in finance, and until very recently, I thought he might be the one. Eric and I met at a mutual friend's housewarming party. I wasn't even going to go, but she insisted, and he was standing by the drink station wearing this ridiculous sweater that said, "Capitalism is sexy," which I still make fun of him for to this day. But he made me laugh, and he was smart, attentive, and genuinely kind. We started dating soon after. It felt easy with him. We'd talk about books, travel, our careers, and what kind of dogs we'd want someday. He's the kind of guy who remembered my coffee order by our third date and once surprised me with dinner and a playlist when I told him I had a rough day at work. For the most part, we've been really good together. Except for one thing. His mother. From the very beginning, I got the feeling she just didn't like me. The first time I met her was at a family barbecue about 4 months into our relationship. I was nervous, but I brought a homemade peach cobbler, wore a nice sundress, and tried to be friendly without being overbearing. She barely looked at me when Eric introduced us, said a flat, "Nice to meet you," and then immediately turned to Eric to ask if his ex-girlfriend Jessica had gotten that internship in New York. That was the first red flag. Throughout the evening, she would call me, "this one," or, "the girl," instead of my name, and when I offered to help in the kitchen or with cleanup, she waved me off with a tight smile like I was intruding. I brushed it off at first. Some people just take longer to warm up, I told myself. But over the next year, nothing changed. I made a point to be polite, to bring thoughtful gifts every time we visited, to ask about her interests, even when she gave me nothing to work with. She would constantly make passive-aggressive comments about how some people don't understand how tight-knit their family is, or how real women know how to cook traditional meals. I'm not even bad in the kitchen, by the way. I made a chicken piccata once that had her other son raving, and she just sniffed and said, "Interesting flavor." Eric always told me not to take it personally. That she's just a little old-fashioned, that she did the same thing to his brother's wife at first, and now they get along fine. But his brother's wife is blonde, religious, and has 2 kids. I'm biracial, agnostic, and focused on my career. I had a sinking suspicion she didn't think I fit the mold. Fast forward to last weekend. It was his mother's 60th birthday, and Eric planned this big dinner at a really upscale restaurant downtown. He was excited about it for weeks, making reservations, coordinating with his siblings, even putting together a slideshow of family photos. I asked if he wanted help with the bill, and he said they were planning to split it among the kids, meaning him, his sister, and his brother. I said sure, I'd chip in for our share. I didn't even hesitate. I make good money, and I know how much it means to him to be part of these family moments. Even when it's hard for me. The dinner started off well enough. The food was amazing, the wine was flowing, and I tried to stay in good spirits. I complimented her dress, told her the photo montage was beautiful, and even got her a gift I put real thought into, this artisan tea set she mentioned liking months ago when I overheard her talking to her sister. She barely glanced at it and said she already had one, similar but nicer. I smiled through it. I kept thinking, just get through dinner. Be the bigger person. Let it go. Then the toast happened. Her oldest son stood up and gave a sweet little speech about how lucky they were to have such a strong, loving mother. People clapped, and then she stood up, holding her champagne flute with this tight little smirk on her face. She said, "I'm just so happy to be surrounded by family, and some of the newer, hopefully temporary additions." Then she looked directly at me. Not around the table. Not at her son's coworkers or a random cousin. At me. There was this weird, stifled laugh around the table. The kind of laugh people do when they're uncomfortable but don't want to rock the boat. Her daughter giggled awkwardly and took a sip of wine. Her husband coughed into his napkin. And Eric. Eric didn't say a word. He just looked at me with this pleading expression, like, please don't make a scene. Like I was the problem. I just stared at him, waiting. I thought he'd at least say something like, "That's not cool, Mom," or even put a hand on my leg under the table to show me he was on my side. Nothing. He sat there like a statue. So I stood up. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I just walked to the bathroom, locked the door, and stood there with my hands shaking, breathing like I was trying not to cry at my own mother's funeral. When I came back, I called the waiter over and told him quietly, "Can you please split my bill from the rest of the table? I'll be paying separately." He nodded and came back with the revised bill. I paid for my meal, left the money for the tip in cash, and stood up. Eric looked at me, confused, and I said, "I'll see you later," and left. About an hour later, I got a text from him saying I was being dramatic and disrespectful, and that I embarrassed him in front of his family. He said his mom was just joking, and that I was ruining what was supposed to be a beautiful night. I responded by saying the only disrespectful thing that happened was his mother calling me temporary in front of everyone, and him just sitting there letting her do it. I told him if he thinks it's okay to let his mother humiliate me after over a year of dating, maybe she's right. Maybe I am temporary. He hasn't replied since. That was 2 days ago. I haven't heard a word. Not a call, not a message. Nothing. I keep replaying the whole thing in my head, wondering if I overreacted, if I should have just smiled and taken it like I always do. But I am so tired of smiling and taking it. I have bent over backwards to try and win that woman's approval. I have played nice even when she made me feel like dirt. And the one time I drew a line, I became the problem. So now I'm lying here, wondering if this relationship is even worth salvaging. Wondering if a man who cannot stand up to his mother, who cannot even text me back after something like this, is someone I want to build a life with. I guess I just need to know, was I actually the asshole here? Update 1. Hi again. First off, thank you to everyone who commented, messaged, or just shared your thoughts after my first post. I read everything. Some replies made me laugh, some made me cry, and a lot of them made me feel less alone. It was strangely comforting to know that I wasn't the only one who'd been in this kind of situation. When you're in the thick of it, it's easy to start questioning your own reality, wondering if you're being overly sensitive or just imagining things. Reading your words helped pull me out of that fog. I wish I could tell you that after posting, everything resolved neatly. That Eric showed up at my door with an apology and some clarity, and that his mom called to say she'd been out of line. But that's not what happened. Not even close. What actually happened was messier, colder, and so much more eye-opening than I was prepared for. 3 full days after the dinner from hell, Eric finally texted me. No phone call. No knock on my door. Just a text asking if I wanted to talk things out like adults and find common ground. I agreed, not because I was ready to forgive, but because a part of me still hoped he'd finally see it from my perspective. That he'd say, "I should have defended you. I'm sorry." But instead, when we sat down at the coffee shop we used to call our spot, he launched into a speech about how his mom had been upset by the tension and that she was open to apologizing, but only if I apologized first. Specifically, he said his mom felt embarrassed that I walked out on the dinner, and that I made the night uncomfortable with my overreaction. And then, with a completely straight face, he said he thought it would be mature of me to say sorry for how I handled it. I remember just sitting there for a second, completely still, like my brain needed a full reboot. I asked him, quietly and clearly, if he seriously thought I should apologize to the woman who publicly implied I was a disposable accessory at her birthday dinner. He looked tired, like he was the one who had been through something, and said, "You know how she is, Anna. She's blunt. She was joking." That's when something inside me just flipped. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even disappointment. It was this cold, still clarity. This realization that we weren't on the same team. That we never had been. I told him I needed time to think. He nodded and said, "Take what you need, but don't take too long. I don't want this to drag out." That was his version of compassion. A week passed. I didn't hear from him. I didn't reach out either. I was sitting with it. Really sitting with it. Turning over every moment of the past year and a half and seeing it through a new lens. Things that used to feel like minor annoyances or misunderstandings started to look a lot like patterns. But then, out of nowhere, I got a group message from his sister inviting me to her daughter's birthday party. It was going to be at a park, with a bounce house, catered food, and all the usual bells and whistles. I almost didn't go. I sat with that invite for a full day before I responded. But I convinced myself, again, that if I just showed up, smiled, played the game for a little longer, I might find a path back to something resembling peace. That if I tried hard enough, maybe his family would eventually see that I wasn't the enemy. So I went. I wore a soft, pastel blouse and jeans. I brought a carefully chosen gift wrapped in sparkly paper. I helped hang streamers and passed out juice boxes to the kids. I didn't bring up the dinner. I didn't ask about Eric's mom. I was polite, helpful, and quiet. I kept my head down, so to speak. It actually felt okay, for a little while. But then the catering truck showed up. Some elaborate taco bar setup with drinks and a dessert station. And when the check came around, Eric's sister, who I've never been particularly close with but who has always maintained a level of cool politeness with me, walked straight up to me, handed me the bill, and said with a smirk, "You're covering yours and Eric's share, right?" I blinked, genuinely confused. Eric hadn't mentioned anything about splitting costs. This wasn't one of those potluck-style things where everyone pitches in. She hadn't said anything about a contribution in the invitation. It caught me completely off guard. I asked, carefully, whether this was a shared bill or if there had been a sign-up. She just shrugged and said, "Well, you've been around long enough. You're basically family, right?" I ended up paying it. $127. I pulled out my card and paid for both of us just to avoid the stares and whispers I could already feel forming behind my back. And the worst part? Eric wasn't even near me when it happened. He was off tossing a football with his nephew, oblivious or pretending to be. I don't know which would have been worse. On the way back to his place, yes, I let him drive us there together, because I was still, somehow, playing along. He casually said, "Thanks for being a team player." Like I had just helped him file taxes or stayed quiet during a board meeting. Not a single word about the fact that his sister had just, once again, treated me like an unpaid employee of their little family unit. I looked out the window the whole ride home, feeling more like a third wheel in my own relationship than I ever had. He didn't notice. Or maybe he did and didn't care. He dropped me off without even asking if I wanted to come up. That was the moment it really sank in. Not just that his family didn't respect me. Not just that his mother had no intention of ever accepting me. But that Eric didn't want to protect me from any of it. He was perfectly content with me absorbing the discomfort, swallowing the disrespect, and continuing to show up, smile, and foot the bill, literally and figuratively. This wasn't a blip. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a blueprint for what life with him would look like. His mother would always be the one pulling the strings, his siblings would always treat me like an outsider unless I paid my way into their circle, and Eric would always choose keeping the peace over keeping me safe. And I had been blind to it because I wanted so badly for it not to be. Update 2. So remember how I said I needed time to think after the niece's birthday party and that I'd pulled back from Eric a little? I did exactly that. I stopped initiating contact. I didn't send the usual good morning or good night texts. I didn't ask if he wanted to grab dinner or come over. I didn't follow up on that "take what you need" conversation because I was genuinely trying to decide whether there was anything left to salvage. I wasn't ghosting him, I was watching. Waiting to see if he'd step up or simply fade out. About 10 days later, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. At first, I assumed it was some spam or a wrong number, but when I opened the message, my stomach dropped. It was his mother. It was the first time she had ever reached out to me directly. No group messages, no forwarded plans through Eric, no awkward in-person cornering. Just a single, carefully worded message that said, "Hi Anna. I realize things got a little tense. I'd like to invite you to a small family dinner this weekend, just us, no drama. I want to clear the air." I stared at it for a long time. I wasn't sure what angle she was playing at. It was so out of character, so polished, so cordial, that it felt artificial. I showed the message to Eric later that night and he looked genuinely surprised, but there was something else behind his expression. A kind of smugness. Like he had been waiting for me to see that she was coming around. He told me it was a good sign, that she was trying, that this was her way of meeting me halfway. Against every screaming instinct in my body, I said yes. I convinced myself that this could be the start of a turning point. That it might be awkward, but it would be honest. That if nothing else, showing up might be the final piece I needed to see who was really standing in my corner. I bought a nice bottle of wine. I picked up a bouquet of fresh tulips, her favorite, based on an offhand comment she made during Easter. I dressed simple but elegant. I wanted to show her that I came in peace, not to score points, not to win, but to really make things better. When I arrived at their house, she opened the door wearing a freshly pressed apron, her hair done, makeup flawless. She gave me a polite nod and said she was glad I came, and that maybe this would be a chance to reset things. Her tone was formal, rehearsed, like she was playing hostess at a neighborhood mixer, but I went along with it. I handed her the wine and flowers, and she accepted them without much reaction, placing them on the counter like they were obligatory props. Dinner was just her, Eric, his dad, and me. She had made roasted chicken with lemon and herbs, buttery potatoes, green beans, and a caprese salad to start. Everything was perfectly plated, like something out of a food magazine. I complimented the meal, and she gave me this sharp little smile and said I should take notes, maybe next time I could host. It was said lightly, with a laugh, like a joke, but the edge was unmistakable. Still, I smiled. I nodded. I kept playing the part because I wanted to believe there was a point to it. The evening stayed civil. No jabs, no comments about temporary girlfriends or backhanded suggestions. It felt surreal. I even started to wonder, just for a second, if this was her version of an apology. An awkward, formal peace offering hidden under polite conversation and potato gratin. And then came dessert. And after that, came the check. Yes, a literal printed check. It was placed on a delicate porcelain tray, folded neatly, with a small gold pen resting on top. I blinked at it, confused, thinking for a moment that it was some kind of novelty gag, until I opened it and saw the numbers. $387.46. For a home-cooked dinner. At their house. She looked directly at me with that same tight-lipped smile and said that since I had said I wanted to be part of the family, this was my chance to show it. That as a gesture of goodwill, I should cover the dinner as a sign of mending relationships. She said it like she was offering me a glass of water, calm, matter of fact, like this was the most reasonable request in the world. I froze. For a second, I was certain I had misheard her. I glanced at Eric, waiting for him to interject, to laugh and say, "Okay, Mom, that's enough," or even just, "What the hell?" But he didn't. He didn't say anything. He looked at the ceiling, as if the paint texture had suddenly become fascinating. Not a word. Not a look in my direction. Just complete, cowardly silence. And then she added, in that same clipped tone, that I had said I didn't want to be temporary, so now was my chance to prove it. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't ask if she was serious, because I already knew the answer. I calmly took out my card, placed it on the tray, and paid the amount. I said, "Thank you for dinner," and stood up. That was it. That was the entire interaction. Eric followed me out to the car in silence. He waited until we were inside, seatbelts clicked, engine humming, before asking if I was okay in that neutral, performative way that people use when they already know the answer and just want to avoid responsibility. And that was the moment I hit my limit. My capacity for grace, for benefit of the doubt, for rationalizing behavior that should have been condemned months ago, it all evaporated. I told him that when we got back to his place, we were going to have a real conversation. Not a brush-off. Not a lecture about how I needed to be more patient. Not another tired explanation that his mother didn't mean it that way, or that it's just her personality. We were going to sit down and talk about everything, who he was choosing, what he really believed, and whether he was actually ready to be with someone who wasn't willing to be his family's scapegoat. No more excuses. No more polite silences. No more picking my dignity up off the floor. We're talking tonight. Update 3. That night, after the check dinner, after the quiet ride, after the smothering fog of rage and humiliation settled into something heavier, something dense and painful, I sat across from Eric in his apartment and told him everything. Not in a roundabout way. Not in a tone softened by compromise or fear of upsetting the balance. I laid it out cleanly, clearly, like a prosecutor presenting evidence. I talked about the birthday toast and how it felt to be laughed at by a room full of people who barely knew me, while the man I loved stayed silent. I brought up the niece's birthday party and how I'd been handed a bill with a smirk like it was part of some initiation rite. I detailed the dinner at his mother's house, the roast chicken, the wine, the polite small talk, and how it had all been staged like a play, ending with a $387 invoice for my dignity. I told him that I was done leaping through hoops, done treating basic decency like a prize I had to earn, and done pretending that his mother's coldness was a personality quirk I needed to learn to accept. Eric started with his usual defense, the one I'd heard too many times. He said she was old-fashioned. He said she didn't mean it that way. He said I was reading into things and that it wasn't as personal as I thought. I didn't let him finish. I said no. We're not doing that anymore. Not tonight. Not ever again. I told him I needed to know if he saw a future with me or if he was just hoping I'd keep enduring his mother until I either cracked or faded away. I said it felt like I was applying for a job that no one actually wanted me to have, and that I was constantly being told I wasn't qualified, no matter how much experience I brought to the table. Something shifted in his face then. He didn't try to argue. He didn't get defensive. He just sat there, silent for a long time, before admitting something I never thought I'd hear from him. He said he spent his whole life walking on eggshells around his mother. That her approval came in small, conditional doses, and that pushing back always came with consequences. He admitted that standing up to her had never been easy and that he didn't know how to do it without causing a bigger problem. I listened. I didn't let myself soften yet, but I listened. Because it wasn't a deflection, it was the first honest thing he'd said in a long time. That's when I heard myself say something I didn't even know I believed until it came out of my mouth. I told him that if his mom doesn't respect me, that's her problem. But if he lets her disrespect me, that's ours. There was another long silence. The kind that stretches so far you start to wonder if anything will come back from the other side. But something did. For the first time, Eric said he would set boundaries. Real ones. Not, I'll talk to her eventually, or, just give her time, but actual, actionable change. He said he'd sit down with her, not just about the check, but about everything. He said he was embarrassed. Not of me. Of how long he let this go on. Of how many times he stood by instead of beside me. And I believed him. I don't know why. I probably shouldn't have. But I did. The next day, we went to his parents' house together. He insisted we both be there. He didn't want to do it behind my back, and I appreciated that more than I expected to. It was tense from the moment we arrived. His mother looked surprised to see me, even though she clearly knew I was coming. She offered tea. I declined. There was no dramatic showdown. No shouting or slammed doors. It was quiet. Cold. Measured. Eric did most of the talking. He told her that things needed to change. That her behavior, toward me, toward us, was not going to be excused anymore. He talked about the birthday toast, the catering bill, and finally the dinner check. He said it was manipulative. Cruel. That it crossed a line. His mother didn't apologize. Not in the traditional sense. She didn't say she was sorry. But she did say, with a tone that was equal parts defensive and resigned, that she never thought Anna would last this long, and that she was testing to see what kind of woman could handle being in this family. It was said so casually, so unapologetically, like we were discussing job training or the weather. The words sat in the air like a bad smell. I looked at her and, without raising my voice, told her that I don't need to be tested. That I'm not a contestant. That if I stay in this relationship, it's because I love Eric, not because I passed some twisted initiation designed to break me down until I proved my worth. She didn't reply. But she didn't argue either. The silence that followed was uncomfortable, but it felt different. Like something had been dislodged. She wasn't trying to charm me or insult me or intimidate me. She was just sitting with what I said. And that silence, her silence, felt like the first honest moment we'd ever shared. I'm not saying things are magically better now. His mom didn't transform overnight. We're not trading recipes or planning brunches. But something shifted. The dynamic cracked, just a little. And Eric stood beside me as it happened.